Our gospel lesson this morning is a painful story that is from long ago. It doesn't really matter anymore in some ways because all foods we think today are clean, and obviously so are all people that we encounter. But this fact is contradicted by one author, Megan McKenna, who offers this sad reminder that Christians themselves have not always done a good job of accepting and welcoming the other. Whether that other is a woman, a foreigner, a member of a different racial or ethnic group, or a person of a different sexual orientation or gender identity. Today, perhaps it's not a stretch to say that deep down some good Christians find some people unclean and unworthy of being fully included at the feast we call life. I say to you this morning, Namaste. I honor your compassionate spirit. It's important to know when we meet in a compassionate space, everyone and everything becomes suddenly a mirror, reflecting a cosmic consciousness that holds all of the pain and all of the joy in an absolute and unconditional embrace. The word namaste is nama, which means to bow. If you trace the meaning of nama a little further, you find that it means not mine. When I bow, I get my small self, that is, our egos, out of the way, meaning that I get my deluded belief that I exist independent of others out of the way. I bow my head as a symbolic act of humility. I press my hands near my heart to indicate my heartfelt respect and compassion. So when I bow in humility, and you bow in humility, and we each get our small selves out of the way, there is only one of us. One large self, big mind, and big heart. Namaste comes out of the Hindu tradition. Interestingly, some of the Hindu scriptures are called darsana, which means mirror. Now, the Christian scriptures say, "For we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall fully understand." The more you see of life, the more you read from all of the sources, even the most gruesome parts of the Old Testament, everything becomes a mirror in which you see ever-deepening truths about yourself and the world reflected back to you. As it says in the Jewish scripture, the Talmud, you do not see things as they are, you see things as you are. Given one wish and $100,000, Karen Armstrong is changing our world. It was back in February of 2008, Armstrong, a respected author and religious scholar who studies the connective tissues between world religions, was awarded the TED Prize for her groundbreaking work. With that funding and the support of the TED organization to grant one wish, Armstrong chose to focus on compassion. Specifically, she asked TED to help her create, to launch, and to propagate a charter for compassion, which you have in your bulletin, crafted by a group of leading inspirational thinkers from three of the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and based on the fundamental principles of universal justice and respect. In November of 2009, the Charter for Compassion was finally born. It grew from contributions of more than 150,000 people from over 180 countries and was crafted into a succinct 312-word pledge that allows room for all faiths by a panel of leading religious scholars. Armstrong attempts to make the journey to compassionate life accessible in her book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. In the preface, she writes, "All faiths insist that compassion is the test of true spirituality, that it brings us into relation with the transcendence we call God, Brahman, Nirvana, or Tao. Each has formulated its own version of what is sometimes called the Golden Rule. Do not treat others as you would not like them to treat you, or in its positive form, always treat others as you would wish to be treated yourself. Further, they all insist that you cannot confine your benevolence to your own group. You must have concern for everybody, even your enemies. Yet, every religion has a history, a great history, of intolerance. I want people to hear the compassionate voice of religion," Armstrong says. "I want to change the conversation and bring compassion to the forefront of every person's attention." Armstrong believes that change happens only one person at a time, and so she points to the world leaders like Gandhi and Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King, and says one sees what one person can do, the tremendous impact of a decision to seek reconciliation and not revenge, as Mandela chose. In an interview, Armstrong says compassion is probably what is going to cause all human beings on this planet to ultimately live together, or all of us will die together. It's not easy, I admit. This is the struggle of a lifetime, not only for Armstrong, but as well as all those people around her and for all of us. Like everybody, I feel that I've suffered, and I feel that I too have been damaged in life, and I meditate unpleasantly, I must confess to you, about my own enemies, and feel this corrosive sense of anger some days. But I must admit, even I can have a sharp tongue, so I'm no different than any of you. So the question I want to ask this morning is, mirror, mirror on the wall, what is it you are revealing to us today? And more specifically today as two congregations. It's almost like Jesus was standing in the center here this morning saying, let your ears be opened. Mirrors, you know, can have revealing truths. They just do. In our gospel this morning, we've heard how Jesus accepted everyone indiscriminately. A desperate mother brings her sick daughter to Jesus, but there was a problem, you see. She was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia, and thus to a Jew who was careful about ritual purity, she was this unclean Gentile. Indeed, Jesus tests her by saying that his primary mission is to the Jews. But this religious and ethnic outsider persisted so much that this Jesus in the story finally praises her paradigm of faith. He similarly touches the untouchable and the healing of the deaf and dumb man. I like what Gary Wills puts so perfectly in his book, What Jesus Meant. God, in his lavish and indiscriminate love, never excludes people because they are unclean, unworthy, or disrespectful. Nor should we, he says. No outcasts were cast out far enough in this world of Jesus' time to make even him shun them. Playing favorites is easy, isn't it? Loving indiscriminately is what is hard. Will Campbell, great author in his time, found this out the hard way in his life. In his two memoirs, 40 Acres and a Goat and A Brother to a Dragonfly, he describes his own experience of learning to love without limits. And just for the record, Brother to a Dragonfly was an important part in my own Christian pilgrimage. Campbell himself was born and raised in the rural and very poor deep south of Amite, Mississippi. He was ordained by family members of a local Baptist church when he was 17, and in a delightfully improbable life played a central role as an activist and an agitator on behalf of African Americans. But to leave it at that would badly misrepresent his story. After serving in World War II, Campbell studied at Tulane, Wake Forest, and at Yale. And after a short stint as a pastor in Louisiana, he served as the director of religious life at the University of Mississippi. But he left after 2 years because his controversial views on race attracted death threats. He then had a stint with the National Council of Churches, working with most of the civil rights luminaries. And in 1957, for example, Campbell was one of 4 people who escorted those 9 black students who integrated Little Rock Central High School, and he was the only white person to attend the founding of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. The hate mail back in his day poured in from all of us white people. As he matured, Campbell began to have this uneasy feeling that he hated those redneck bigots who hated. He discovered how easy it was to play favorites and to oppress the oppressors. Strange, he thought, how he enjoyed thinking that God hated all the same people that he hated. He realized that he had hated God in his own image and after his own personal and political likeness. So through a series of encounters with unlikely teachers, Campbell came to admit that after 20 years in ministry, he had become little more than a doctrinaire social activist, which was different than being a follower of the ways of Jesus. The key? He says, I came to understand the nature of tragedy. And one who understands the nature of tragedy can never take sides. You see, Campbell saw how he had played favorites and taken sides, and he had subverted the indiscriminate love of the Holy One for all people without conditions, limits, or exceptions into a ministry of liberal sophistication. Acting upon these convictions, he began to start sipping whiskey with the Ku Klux Klan. He did their funerals and weddings. He even befriended the Grand Dragon of North Carolina, J.R. Bob Jones. And when they were sick, he emptied their bedpans, and man, then the hate mail came from the liberal left. And in a 1967 interview with an oral history that he gave to the University of Southern Mississippi, he joked and said this: "It's been a long time since I got a hate letter from the right, but now they're coming from the left." End of quote. Since the Holy One doesn't play favorites, Campbell concluded, neither should he. For too long, I certainly believe, for far, far too long, religion and politics have been about being right. No more. From now on, I say, forge our beliefs from this question: what is the most compassionate thing that we can do, rather than what is the most orthodox? Is it always going to be obvious what the compassionate response will be? I will tell you myself, no. Some issues, you see, are complex and they're ambiguous, but there are times when you will know what is right, and you will know because you feel it deep within your own gut. So I say, not just in the world, but in our two congregations, may compassion rule. And if compassion rules in your life, then you will suddenly become a mirror for others. So I invite all of us in the days ahead to take some time and look into the mirror. Look into our own hearts and discover what it is that gives you pain. And then refuse, under any circumstances whatsoever, to inflict that pain on another person. Choose compassion, and may we be a part of healing the world. May it be so for you. May it be so for me.